Corla, Taoiseach, we know that Saudi Arabia has been committing war crimes in Yemen since the start of its assault on that country. It has consistently and deliberately bombed civilian targets, but just as significant is the fact that Saudi Arabia has systemically used starvation as a weapon of war in Yemen, really a tactic worthy of the Third Reich and indeed a tactic which they employed. And I suppose, given that Ireland is exporting beef and baby formula to Saudi Arabia, a country that's enacting its own hunger plan on Yemen, a country that's actively and deliberately engaging in mass murder through the systemic starvation of a population, isn't it about time that we called a halt and imposed a full trade and arms embargo?
Response?
Yeah, Concurrent, I understand that we're taking parliamentary questions 43, 49, 52 and 75 together.
Agreed.
Is that okay? Because I have quite a long answer here, so you might...
You'll get the extra minutes.
Yeah, thanks. After nearly 4 years of conflict in this extremely poor country, the lives of millions of people in Yemen are in danger and have been for many months now. In addition to the hazards of war, many have difficulties in accessing food and health care due to insecurity and poor humanitarian access. Millions of others are unable to pay for food and medical care even when it's available due to the collapse of the economy under the strains of conflict. This crisis in Yemen is a matter of grave concern and a solution is urgent. The United Nations plays an absolutely critical role in working towards a political solution to this conflict. Ireland and the EU regard the appointment of Special Envoy Martin Griffiths in March 2018 as a very positive move. Mr Griffiths has worked tirelessly to bring the parties together with EU support. At the very end of 2018, his efforts bore some fruit with the holding of talks in Stockholm between Yemeni parties. This meeting was the first time in 2.5 years that both the government of Yemen and the Houthi leaders came together to promote the interests of the Yemeni people. However, this is only the beginning of what may prove to be a long and painstaking process. It is expected that the next round of talks will take place in the region. Their success will be dependent on the progress made since December, and in that regard, implementation of the agreements reached in Stockholm will be critical. In December, agreement was reached on the basis for a ceasefire and troop redeployment in the port city of Hodeida, the key point of entry in Yemen for the majority of food, medicine and aid. The ceasefire is fragile and both sides have accused the other of breaches. Notwithstanding that, it is holding for the most part. What is needed now is time to allow the agreements to be implemented, the space to allow the UN-sponsored talks to continue. That does not mean that we sit back and do nothing. In fact, the UN Secretary-General has urged the international community to sustain pressure on both parties as they work together to implement the Stockholm Agreement. Careful diplomacy is required to ensure we achieve the best result for the people of Yemen. We discussed the situation in Yemen at the EU Foreign Affairs Council last week. The UN Special Envoy, Martin Griffiths, has thanked the EU for its support, saying it would not have been possible to reach agreement in Stockholm without it, including reaching out to Iran. However, as my Swedish colleague confirmed to me, what was agreed at Stockholm is fragile and needs EU support to move forward. Despite these hopeful steps, therefore, we should be under no illusion as to the gravity of the situation. After almost 4 years of conflict, the humanitarian situation on the ground remains dire, with a devastated economy and an almost complete collapse of basic public services exacerbating the crisis. Here the UN has a critical role to play in coordinating the delivery of assistance. The UN reports that the gravity of the humanitarian situation in Yemen is exacerbated by the underlying poverty of the country. Even where there is food in shops, people, as I said earlier, are unable to afford it. Humanitarian access is also a critical issue, and access across Yemen deteriorated significantly in 2018, both in government and Houthi-controlled areas. Security issues, bureaucratic impediments and delays to humanitarian movements continue to interfere with humanitarian responses. In terms of humanitarian funding, Ireland has provided almost €17.5 million in humanitarian assistance to Yemen since 2015. This includes a contribution of €5 million made to the UN Yemen Humanitarian Fund in 2018, which provides assistance in areas such as education, logistics, food security, nutrition and health. We plan to make a similar €5 million contribution to the Humanitarian Fund in 2019. The majority of Ireland's direct assistance in 2018 was channelled through the UN Humanitarian Fund for Yemen. Ireland and Saudi Arabia have a significant economic relationship, but our trade partnership does not prevent us from raising our human rights concerns through the most appropriate and effective channels. Ireland's foreign policy has always been based, above all, on the resolution of conflict by dialogue. In many cases, continuing our trading relationships and building on our close ties allows us greater access to key interlocutors who can influence foreign policy decisions. In relation to the question of an arms embargo, I am aware that some EU members, which do have arms industries, have decided to halt arms exports for the present to countries involved in the conflict in Yemen. A decision at EU level for a full arms embargo on any country would require the agreement of all EU member states, and there is currently no consensus at EU level on an arms embargo on Saudi Arabia or any member of that coalition. However, all EU member states have signed and ratified the 2014 Arms Trade Treaty. This treaty exists to ensure that arms sales do not fuel conflicts and to prevent arms from falling into the hands of non-state actors or terrorists. Ireland's efforts are concentrated on ensuring the effective implementation of that treaty. Let me reiterate Ireland's deep concern on this issue. The scale of need on the ground is difficult to overestimate. While Ireland is contributing what we can to the humanitarian effort, we must continue to push for a lasting political solution that will address the conflict at the heart of this extraordinary human suffering.
Taoiseach, our concern, our stern words haven't altered the fact that millions of Yemenis are in danger of death by starvation, and your response talking about poor humanitarian access, the collapse of the economy due to conflict, ignores the fact that these are not accidental byproducts, but the tactic of famine is actually not a side effect. It's a deliberate tactic by Saudi Arabia, orchestrated situation where we know from evidence given that Yemen's geography means that to destroy its farmland is something that you really have to go out of your way to do. It doesn't happen by accident. The fact that hundreds and hundreds of Yemeni fishing boats have been shot to pieces by machine gun fire from Saudi helicopters isn't a coincidence. It has to be organised. And the blockade of Hodeidah was calculatingly organised, the only port sufficient to bring in food supply from abroad, with a lot of the humanitarian aid programme was deliberately obstructed by the Saudi bombardment in that area. And isn't it about time now that we do a lot more than just stern words and talk about negotiations? We need a lot more while this deliberate tactic is leading and contributing to people's deaths.
Response. 1 minute, please.
Sorry, I don't disagree with any of that. And that is why a lot of the focus of the conversation with Martin Griffiths when we met him and got a briefing from him in Brussels was on the court of Hodeidah, or the port of Hodeidah, in terms of first of all ensuring that there wasn't a massacre there, and secondly ensuring that that port could facilitate delivery of aid and medicines and so on. So, I can assure you, Deputy, the issues in relation to Yemen have been the source of pretty intense discussion, actually, at an EU level repeatedly, and interaction with the key UN a person who's involved in trying to ensure that a ceasefire sticks this time. I think Sweden have played a very proactive and helpful role in that. and will continue to try to do that. But I do think that Ireland is most effective here by trying to be part of a collective voice from the European Union, rather than demanding to do things on our own. I just don't think that will work.
You'll have